A single clash of swords rewrote Spain's destiny in ways no one could have imagined. Picture this: Christian monarchs, enemies for generations, suddenly standing shoulder to shoulder against an army that declared itself the sword of the divine. The shockwaves from that confrontation would ripple through every corner of Europe for centuries to come. Under a merciless sky, over 200,000 men prepared to decide the fate of nations. Two religions, two visions of the world, standing on opposite sides of a blood-soaked valley. That afternoon, belief transformed into blazing rage, and the pages of history were written not with ink, but with sacrifice and sharpened iron. But how did we get here? What brought these warriors to this moment of reckoning? Our tale begins nearly 2 decades before that fateful confrontation, in the year 1195, at a desolate stronghold known as Alarcos. This isolated fortress stood watch over the windswept plains of central Castile. Here, the confident forces of King Alfonso VIII of Castile encountered total annihilation. The ground became crimson as endless waves of mounted warriors from the Almohad Caliphate, a formidable empire rising from North Africa, shattered the Christian cavalry under relentless volleys of arrows and Greek fire. When the battle fog lifted, Alarcos had vanished from the map. Castilian war banners lay crushed beneath boots and hooves. Thousands were shackled and forced marched southward to Cordoba as prisoners. The survivors returned home speaking in hushed tones of dark standards, cavalry that seemed infinite, and a commander whose very name carried the weight of thunder: Caliph Yaqub al-Mansur. For Alfonso, this wasn't merely a military defeat. It was a scar carved into his very soul. He had marched believing heaven stood with him. Instead, heaven had looked away. In the years following that catastrophe, settlement after settlement surrendered to the advancing armies. Church towers fell silent. The symbol of the cross disappeared from every captured citadel. The once-proud king became a haunted figure, restless and consumed by doubt. His royal court whispered behind closed doors. Yet within that crushing humiliation, something harder than steel began to form within his spirit. When Caliph Mohammed al-Nasir, the new master of the Almohads, sailed across from Morocco in 1211, he delivered an ultimatum to every Christian ruler in Iberia: "I will wipe the cross from these lands forever." For Alfonso, these words felt like destiny calling him back to the battlefield. He assembled his most trusted advisors within the towering Cathedral of Toledo. Candlelight danced across his battle-worn features. Dropping to his knees before the sacred altar, he didn't pray for triumph or revenge. Instead, he asked for one final opportunity to correct what had gone so terribly wrong. "If your eyes still rest upon this kingdom," he breathed into the darkness, "grant me one more chance to face them, not for personal honor, not to settle scores, but so that Spain itself might survive." That evening, Toledo's bells rang out across the city, and in their deep, resonating echoes, the storm gathering at Las Navas de Tolosa had already begun its approach. The echoes of Toledo's bells had scarcely faded when mounted messengers carried Alfonso's desperate plea across the northern kingdoms. This was no call for territorial gain, this was a summons for salvation. Alfonso VIII of Castile had reached out for aid, and the response exceeded all expectations. Not from a single ally, but from 3 separate thrones. In the halls of Aragon, King Peter II received the message. Young, ambitious, a fighter molded by the Catalonian peaks, he had once crossed swords with Alfonso. But this time he recognized something larger than old rivalries, an opportunity to face the shadow threatening to consume all of Iberia. From the mountain kingdom of Navarre came King Sancho VII, called the Strong by his subjects. A towering giant of a man, quiet and intimidating, a ruler who smiled rarely but never knew the meaning of retreat. 3 monarchs, former adversaries, now united by shared faith for the first time in living memory. When news of their alliance reached Rome, Pope Innocent III blessed their endeavor, proclaiming it the Iberian Crusade. He offered spiritual absolution to every warrior who would march beneath the banner of the cross. And march they did. From the fields of France came knights draped in white, crimson crosses blazing on their chests. From the Italian states, soldiers bearing sacred relics. From Portugal, veterans hardened by constant frontier warfare. Even monks abandoned their monasteries to take up arms. By the spring of 1212, an unprecedented host had assembled. Estimates placed their numbers at 70,000, a living sea of pennants and polished armor spreading across the landscape like an incoming tide. They advanced southward, following the scorching heat and choking dust through the farmlands of La Mancha, where the sun hammered down like a blacksmith's forge. War drums provided their marching rhythm, and at night, stars bore witness to their passage like a river of determination flowing toward destiny. Waiting for them beyond the mountain ranges stood the armies of Caliph Mohammed al-Nasir, an empire fighting under the crescent banner, prepared to drown them in flames and tempered steel. Yet something had shifted within the Christian ranks. Fear had transformed into something far more dangerous: purpose. For the first time anyone could remember, Spain marched as a unified force. As the massive army established camp at the base of the Sierra Morena, a solitary voice rose from the evening darkness, chanting the words that had once stirred warriors in the Holy Land. Deus vult, God wills it. The Crusader host pushed forward for weeks, an endless column of faith and iron crawling across sun-scorched terrain. But when they confronted the Sierra Morena, that jagged spine of mountains splitting Spain down its center, their advance ground to a complete halt. The mountain passes were controlled by the Caliph's forces. Every canyon was monitored, every trail was defended. The temperature was unbearable, supplies had run out, and the very atmosphere shimmered with heat distortion and mounting dread. Doubt began creeping through the ranks like poison. Some whispered it was an ambush. Others feared God had forsaken them once again. Even the proud banners hung limp and faded, drained of color by the relentless sun. As darkness fell, campfires burned weakly. Men knelt in prayer, argued in hushed voices, and stared at those mountains, an impenetrable barrier standing between them and their fate. Inside the royal command tent, King Alfonso of Castile knelt alone. His armor bore the stains of dust and perspiration. His whispered prayer was simple: "If this is your trial, reveal the path forward, or let me perish here on this ground." Outside, the wind carried an unexpected sound, the distant ringing of a bell emerging from the blackness. Then a figure appeared among the tents, a shepherd, barefoot, covered in the dust of the mountains. He materialized before the sentries like an apparition. No one learned his name. He spoke of wandering these peaks his entire life, of a dream where divine light had revealed a hidden route through the cliffs, a passage unknown to the enemy forces. The commanders questioned his story, but Alfonso looked into the stranger's eyes and saw no deception. He issued the command that would change everything. "We move at first light." In the deepest hours before dawn, the Crusader army began moving through the darkness. Silent as spirits, torches flickered along the cliff faces like stars that had fallen to earth and gotten trapped in stone. The pathway was impossibly narrow, carved by centuries of rainfall and erosion, barely wide enough for a single mounted rider. Warriors stumbled, some lost their footing, but not a single man turned back. As the first rays of morning light broke across the horizon, the army emerged on the opposite side of the mountain range. Spread out below them lay the plain of Las Navas de Tolosa. And beyond that, stretching to the distant horizon, a vast ocean of military tents and fluttering banners catching the golden sunrise. The Caliph's army, the concentrated power of the Almohad Empire, assembled in one place. For a long, breathless moment, absolute silence reigned. Then somewhere within the Christian ranks, a whisper began to spread. "God has shown us the way." Every warrior standing on that mountainside understood one fundamental truth: there would be no turning back from this valley. The morning of July 16th, 1212, arrived cold and eerily quiet. A thin fog clung to the valley floor of Las Navas de Tolosa like a burial shroud, concealing the two most massive armies Spain had ever witnessed. On one flank, the banners bearing the cross. On the opposing side, the crescent moon flags of the Almohad Caliphate, green and gold silk rippling in the strengthening breeze. Between these two forces, nothing but pregnant silence. A silence so profound it seemed the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which side heaven would champion. King Alfonso VII of Castile rode forward to address his troops. His armor carried the dents and scars of countless previous battles. Behind him stood Peter II of Aragon, eyes burning with youthful intensity, alongside the massive figure of Sancho VII of Navarre, whose shadow seemed to darken the very soil. Alfonso raised his battle sword toward the heavens. Morning light caught the blade, making it blaze like captured fire. "This day," he proclaimed, "we don't fight for royal titles or territorial claims. We fight for Spain's very soul." Priests moved through the assembled ranks, voices trembling as they offered final blessings. Thousands upon thousands of warriors dropped to their knees in the dust, made the sign of the cross, and whispered prayers that might be their last. Across the valley floor, within a magnificent golden pavilion, Caliph Mohammed al-Nasir observed in perfect stillness. Serene, draped in pristine white silk, his expression revealed nothing. Surrounding him stood his legendary Black Guard, the Sudanese warriors, bound together by iron chains, sworn by sacred oath to die before allowing their ruler to fall in battle. When the first rays of true sunlight pierced through the morning mist, the Caliph lifted his hand in signal. The desert war drums began their ominous beat, slow, deep, then building in tempo and volume until the earth itself trembled. A cloud of arrows rose into the sky, a descending curtain of death falling toward the Christian formations. Men screamed, horses reared in terror, wooden shields splintered like dry kindling. "Hold the line," Alfonso's voice cut through the chaos. Like a wall forged from living steel, the formation held firm. Then came the response, a roar that rolled across the valley like approaching thunder. "Deusvult, God WLLS it." Thousands of mounted knights lowered their lances. Sunlight exploded off their polished armor in blinding flashes. War horns screamed their fury. And then the charge began. The impact was like the collision of tectonic plates, steel meeting flesh, faith crashing into fury. The front ranks of both armies simply disappeared into a tornado of dust and crimson spray. Peter of Aragon led his contingent up the left flank, smashing directly into the Muslim cavalry units. Wooden lance shafts shattered like matchsticks. The ground shook beneath the thunder of hooves and the dying screams of warriors. In the center of the maelstrom, Alfonso fought like a man possessed by holy fury. Arrows hammered against his shield. Sword blades glanced off his armor plate, but he refused to yield a single step backward. For one terrifying moment, enemy fighters surrounded him completely, a whirlwind of curved blades and war cries. It seemed certain he would fall. Then a squad of Navri's knights crashed through the encirclement, throwing back the attackers, buying their king a single precious moment to catch his breath and raise his sword once more. From his distant observation point, the Caliph watched, his calm facade cracking into barely controlled rage. He sent forward wave after wave of reinforcements. Cavalry squadrons, archer companies, mercenary fighters from across Africa. But the Christian line held. Every assault met the same unyielding wall of shields and unshakable faith. The valley transformed into a furnace. Dust and black smoke rose in towering columns. The cries of dying men merged with the endless clash of metal on metal. The air itself tasted of iron and spilled blood. By the time the sun reached its zenith, both armies were completely exhausted. Tens of thousands lay motionless on the blood-soaked ground. But the battle was far from finished. Behind the Muslim battle lines, the Caliph's golden command pavilion gleamed like a desert mirage, encircled by his infamous chained black guard. Warriors literally linked together by iron bonds, a living fortress that had never been breached. The Christians could see their ultimate objective now, the beating heart of the enemy force, the chains binding an empire together. And somewhere deep within the chaos and carnage, a voice rose above the din. "Forward, defiant, unstoppable, break the chains." The words spread like wildfire through exhausted ranks. What started as a whisper exploded into a battle roar. "Break the chains, break the chains." Every man who heard that cry understood the truth. If they could reach that golden tent, if they could shatter those iron bonds, this battle, and the fate of Spain itself, would be decided forever. The battle had consumed the entire morning. Now the sun hung directly overhead like a burning medallion, pouring its fury onto a valley already drowning in death. The plain of Las Navas de Tolosa was unrecognizable. Once green pastures, now blackened with ash and carpeted with the fallen. The atmosphere vibrated with heat. Warriors fought knee-deep in dust, their boots slipping on bodies rather than soil. Every heartbeat pounded like another war drum. King Alfonso of Castile could barely draw breath. His lips were split and bleeding, his sword blade chipped and stained crimson. Around him, his soldiers looked like walking corpses, faces gray with exhaustion but eyes still blazing with unshakable faith. They no longer shouted for victory, they simply refused to die. Across the blood-soaked field, that golden pavilion still gleamed, untouched and arrogant, like a beacon of imperial pride amidst the storm of war. The black guard surrounding it remained an elite fortress of African warriors linked by their iron chains, armor gleaming, eyes cold and emotionless. They weren't simply soldiers, they were a living citadel of flesh and steel. For hours, Christian forces had hurled themselves against that impenetrable wall. Every charge ended identically. A thunderous roar, a catastrophic crash, and then the metallic hiss of men dying against those cursed chains. The defensive line held, always, it seemed utterly unbreakable. Then through the haze of heat and screaming, a new sound cut across the valley floor like a blade through silk. The blast of northern war horns. From the far right flank came the banners of Navarre, a white field bearing a crimson lion roaring defiance in the scorching wind. Leading them rode King Sancho VII el Fuerte, the strong. He towered above every man around him, His greatsword was wide enough to cleave a warhorse in half. Sunlight struck his armor and transformed him into a moving pillar of flame. He raised that massive blade high, and his voice boomed across the plain. "Navarre with me to the tents." The war cry rolled like thunder. Men who could barely stand found strength to lift their weapons one final time. The Navarrese knights assembled, heavy cavalry from the Pyrenees, their massive warhorses snorting clouds of steam, eyes wild with battle fury. Sancho pointed his sword directly at the golden pavilion. "There lies the beast's heart, tear it out and Spain will live forever." Trumpets answered him with their brilliant cry. And then the earth itself began to move. The charge of Navarre wasn't a cavalry gallop. It was a geological event, an avalanche of iron and faith and raw determination. The ground split apart under the thunderous impact of hooves. A wall of armored warriors roared forward, tearing through the exhausted ranks of friend and foe alike without slowing. Dust exploded skyward. The first line of the Black Guard lowered their spears in perfect formation. The two forces collided with the sound of a mountain collapsing onto itself. Chains rattled, snapped, screamed in metallic agony. The Navarrese hacked and tore at them with battle axes and heavy swords. For several heartbeats, the air was nothing but iron and blood and chaos. King Sancho fought like a man touched by divine madness. He brought his enormous sword crashing down onto a chain link. The impact threw sparks like lightning in daylight. The iron burst apart, then another, then another. Each severed link was a heartbeat. Each heartbeat was a prayer made manifest. His warhorse reared up, iron-shod hooves hammering down on the chains, and suddenly, impossibly, the wall began to crumble. The fortress protecting the Caliph trembled. "Break the chains," someone screamed with their final breath. The shout transformed into a deafening roar. "Break the chains, break the chains, break the chains." All across that blood-soaked field, the cry spread like divine fire. Men who had nothing left to give somehow found new strength buried deep within their souls. They threw themselves forward, smashing, cutting, clawing at that iron barrier with their bare hands if necessary. And then finally it shattered. The Black Guard fell, their legendary chains fragmenting like glass beneath a hammer's blow. The Christians surged through the breach like floodwaters through a broken dam, a tidal wave of steel and holy fury. They reached the golden tent. The crescent moon banner fell from its pole, torn down, trampled into the blood-soaked dust of the valley floor. From the opposite side of the valley, Alfonso VIII witnessed the crescent banner's fall. For one crystalline moment, the entire battlefield fell silent in his mind, sound and fury fading to nothing. He lifted his battered sword high above his head and shouted, his voice raw and cracking with emotion. "Forward for God and Castile." The entire Christian army answered with a single earth-shaking roar. The complete Christian line surged forward as one unified force. The Almohad ranks collapsed. Panic devoured them faster than any blade could have. The Caliph fled from his shattered golden tent. His elite guards lay dead behind him, their broken chains glinting in the afternoon sunlight like rivers of molten silver scattered across the valley. When the fighting finally began to slow, the battlefield was beyond recognition. The air carried the scent of iron, dust, and hard-won victory. King Sancho rode slowly through the ruins of the Black Guard, his warhorse carefully stepping over twisted chains and broken bodies. He stopped before the demolished tent, gazed at the crimson horizon painted by the dying sun, and whispered, "The chains are broken." At that precise moment, the last rays of sunlight struck his armor, and it blazed like holy fire. From that fire, Spain would be reborn. Evening descended upon Las Navas de Tolosa like a gentle hand, closing a book written in blood. Smoke rose slowly toward a sky stained crimson and purple by the setting sun. The wind carried the mingled scent of ash, sweat, and blood, the unmistakable smell of both victory and profound loss. The valley that had thundered with war now lay silent, broken only by the soft moan of wind moving through tattered banners and the quiet prayers of survivors. Thousands lay where they had fallen. Some prayed, some wept openly. Others simply stared at the darkening clouds with eyes too tired to bear the weight of what they had witnessed. King Alfonso of Castile dismounted his horse. He walked slowly across the battlefield, his boots sinking into dust mixed with the blood of enemies and brothers alike. Every step felt impossibly heavy. He had won, but what meaning does victory hold when so many of God's children lie still beneath the uncaring sky? He found King Sancho of Navarre standing beside the ruins of the Golden Pavilion. The broken chains of the Black Guard lay scattered around his feet like the shattered bonds of destiny itself. Sancho looked up. His armor was cracked and dented. His eyes were hollow yet somehow still alive with something words couldn't capture. Alfonso nodded slowly. No words were necessary. Both men understood perfectly what this day meant and what it had cost. Nearby, priests sang low hymns over the fallen. The setting sun transformed the crosses on their cloaks to gold. As the hymn rose and spread across the valley, it became both a lament for the dead and a promise to the living. From that day forward, the chains captured at Las Navas de Tolosa would hang in cathedrals throughout Spain, an eternal symbol of faith that shattered tyranny. The Almohad Caliph, Mohammed al-Nasir, fled across the sea to Morocco. He would never again set foot on Iberian soil. His once mighty empire began crumbling within a single decade. But for Spain, this was the dawn of something greater than any single battle. The roads to Córdoba, Seville, and Granada now lay open before the Christian kingdoms. The Reconquista, the centuries-long reclaiming of Iberia, had found its beating heart on that blood-soaked plain. Generations later, when Granada finally fell in 1492 and the last crescent banner was lowered from its ancient towers, the chroniclers would write. It all began on a summer's day when the caliph's chains were shattered and three kings stood as one. The wind swept across the valley one final time, scattering dust over broken shields and fallen warriors. And in that fading twilight, it was said that if you listened carefully enough, you could still hear the echo of their battle cry reverberating across the centuries. Deus volta. God wills it. From faith and fire, a new Spain had been forged in blood and iron. Alternative opening hook. What if I told you that three enemies became brothers for just one day, and that single day changed the map of Europe forever? This is that story. Mid-video retention hook insert before the secret path. But here's where it gets impossible. They were trapped. The enemy controlled every pass. They were out of food, out of options. And then, a stranger appeared from nowhere with a secret that shouldn't exist. Stay with me, this is where history becomes legend. Before climax, if you're feeling the tension right now, just imagine being there, knowing that everything, absolutely everything, comes down to the next few minutes. At ending, 3 kings, 1 battle, the birth of a nation. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments which moment hit the hardest.